Alright, hi guys, it's Mr. Vree. I'm going to go through the lesson that you're going to be writing notes on real quick. Going to go through it pretty fast, but just so you have a general idea of what's going on. So, we just did that lab and it really showed how in populations there's going to be natural variation. And I thought I would introduce this video here to get us started.
Hey look! It's our friend, Gregor Mendel, the super monk who discovered the basic principles of genetics. Hopefully you remember all of this. Both parents contribute one version of each of their genes called an allele to their offspring, and some of those alleles are dominant or always expressed, while others are recessive and only expressed when they're not paired with a dominant one. Oh, and here's our old friend Chucky D. He lets me call him that. All this information that Mendel figured out would have been really quite interesting to him, because Darwin spent his whole life defending his ideas of natural selection as the primary force for evolution. But Darwin had no idea how traits were passed on to their offspring, even though these two guys were living and working at the same time. Both Mendel and Darwin died not knowing how their ideas fit together. So today, we're going to introduce them and their ideas to one another through the science of population genetics, which demonstrates how genetics and evolution influence each other. And I have good news! It involves a lot of math. Population genetics on the surface is not a complicated idea. It's the study of how populations of a species change genetically over time, leading to a species evolving. So let's start out by defining what a population is. It's simply a group of individuals of a species that can interbreed. And because we have a whole bunch of fancy genetic testing gadgets, and because unlike Darwin, we know a whole lot about heredity, we can now study the genetic change in populations over just a couple of generations. This is really exciting and really, fun because it's basically like scientific instant gratification. I can now observe evolution happening within my lifetime, so yeah, let's cross that off the old bucket list. Now, part of population genetics, or PopGen, I know we've got fancy abbreviations for everything now, involves the study of factors that cause changes in what's called allele frequency, which is just how often certain alleles turn up within a population. And those changes are at the heart of how and why evolution happens. So there are several factors that change allele frequency within a population. And just like Fast and Furious movies, there are 5 of them. And unlike Fast and Furious movies, they're actually very, very important and are the basic reason why all complex life on Earth exists. The main selective pressure is simply natural selection itself, Darwin's sweet little baby, which he spent a lot of his career defending from haters. Obviously, we know this natural selection makes the alleles that make animals the strongest and most virile and least likely to die more frequent in the population. Now, most selective pressures are environmental ones, like food supply, predators, or parasites. But at the population level, one of the most important evolutionary forces is sexual selection. And population genetics gets its special attention, particularly when it comes to what's called non-random mating, which is a lifestyle that I encourage in all of my students. Do not mate randomly. Sexual selection is the idea that certain individuals will be more attractive mates than others because of specific traits. This means they'll be chosen to have more sex and therefore more offspring. The PopGen spin on things is that sexual selection means mating isn't random. There are specific traits that are preferred, even though they may not make the animals technically more fit for survival. So sexual selection changes the genetic makeup of a population because the alleles of the most successful maters are going to show up more often in the gene pool. Mater's gonna mate. Another important factor here, and another thing that Darwin wished he had understood, is mutation. Sometimes when eggs and sperm are formed through meiosis, a mistake happens in the copying process of DNA. Bad errors in the DNA could result in the death or deformation of offspring, but not all mutations are harmful. Sometimes these mistakes can create new alleles that benefit the individual by making it better at finding food or avoiding predators or finding a mate. These good errors and the alleles they made are then passed to the next generation and into the population. Fourth, we have genetic drift, which is when an allele's frequency changes due to random chance. A chance that's greater if the population is small, and thus happens much more quickly if the population gets knocked way back by a tornado or something. Genetic drift does not cause individuals to be more fit, just different. Finally, when it comes to allele game changers, you gotta respect the gene flow, which is when individuals with different genes find their way into a population and spread their alleles all over the place. Immigration and emigration are good examples of this, and as with genetic drift, Its effects are most easily seen in small populations. Again, our factors. Natural selection. Alleles for fitter organisms become more frequent. Sexual selection. Alleles for more sexually attractive organisms become more frequent. Mutation. New alleles popping up due to mistakes in DNA. Genetic drift. Changes in allele frequency due to random chance. And gene flow. Changes in allele frequency due to mixing with new genetically different populations. Now that you know all that, in order to explain specifically how these processes influence populations, we're going to have to completely forget about them. This is what's called the
Alright, so that was kind of a quick introduction to what we're going to be talking about here for the next couple minutes. So basically, as you saw, genetics and evolution kind of go hand in hand. If you're going to have populations change, there's going to have to be a change in their genes, and it's not going to be at an individual level, but in the level of populations. So, just a couple of reminders that we'll be talking about. Genotypes are going to be the actual alleles that they carry, and the phenotype is how they physically appear or are expressed. So natural selection is acting on phenotype, but not on genotype. In other words, you can be heterozygous and carry both the recessive allele and the dominant allele, but it's the fact that you're showing that dominant allele and what will determine if you survive or reproduce or not, if that is being selected for. So let's use an example here of these mice. So there could be a situation, well, first of all, let's introduce the term gene pool. So if this is the population, these black and brown dots represent all the alleles in that population. So that's what is called the gene pool. So it's all the possible alleles. As you can see, most of the mice show the black phenotype, and only 36% show the brown phenotype. So this would be an example of a population. Now, if these alleles were to change, let's say brown, like in the rock pocket mice, they're more fit, then what we'll see is a change in the gene pool, where the brown alleles become more abundant as the black mice are less successful. So I'm going to let you write down the definitions of gene pool from your textbook, but let's talk a little bit about allele frequency. So allele frequency is how frequent these alleles are in the gene pool. So if there is, actually we can do the math here real quick. So we have 36 times 2, because every mouse that's brown has 2 of these, so that's 72. And we have 48 heterozygous black mice, which means 48 of them are brown. Do a little math here, so 0, carry the 1, 8 plus 4, so we have 120 brown alleles, whereas we only have 16 times 2, 32 black alleles here, and then we have another 48 here. So we have 0, carry the 1, we have 80. So 60%, or 120 out of 200 alleles are brown. So the allele frequency for brown would be 60%, and the black allele frequency, 80 out of 200, would be 40%. So that's what we mean by allele frequency. Turn off draw.